You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of March 2023 on Monocle Radio. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, South Korea's president is told he can be freed from prison in the midst of two trials. We'll examine the reason for his release. Also coming up,
we helped them out with the problem they were having to do with the tariffs. We had a very good conversation.
But with constant backtracks and rethinks, how does America's automotive industry cope with all the uncertainty? Plus,
just a reminder, it has provided this service for 400 years. And so the key question now is who will take over this task?
We'll find out why, after 400 years, Denmark's postal service is to stop sending letters. Plus, we'll have the latest from Paris after an unexploded Second World War bomb is discovered near to the Gare du Nord. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. A court in South Korea has ruled that President Yoon Suk Yeol may be released from prison. President Yoon is currently being held since his arrest on charges of leading an insurrection, one of the few criminal charges the president does not have immunity from. He's also currently the subject of two trials, an impeachment in the Constitutional Court, plus that criminal case of insurrection. Well, I'm joined now by John Nilsson Wright, head of the Japan and Korea programme and Centre for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon.
So in this context, why is President Yoon likely to be released?
Well, the particular reasons that have been cited by the court are really about timing. President Yoon was taken into custody by a body known as the Corruption Investigation Office on the 15th of January. And under South Korean law, he could be held for up to 10 days, after which time, by the time that period ends, he needs to be charged in order to be retained in custody. But apparently, the Corruption Investigation Office failed to do so within the designated time, and therefore the court has ruled that he can be released. There is a second reason as well, which is about the jurisdiction of the body that actually arrested him and carried out that investigation. The Corruption Investigation Office, as the name suggests, is charged with investigating cases of corruption. And reportedly, the charge of insurrection that has been leveled at President Yoon is outside its remit. So it looks as if the decision by the court to announce that he should be released is based on those two principal issues, timing and jurisdiction. It has no bearing on the question of the impeachment case that is currently before the Constitutional Court. It also has no bearing really on the question of his alleged criminality in announcing martial law. And therefore, while he may be released, and it's still a maybe because the prosecutors have the responsibility and opportunity within the next 7 days to appeal the decision of the court, while he may be released, it won't affect his larger vulnerability, if you like, on those two critical issues before the constitutional and criminal courts.
So this is news based on. So this is a judgment based on the fact on two procedural issues. Nonetheless, this will be wonderful news for the fans who have actually started to gather outside the presidential palace, anticipating his return.
Yes, and it's understandable why they would feel emboldened, because they believe that President Yoon has done nothing wrong, although that stands in sharp contrast to the 60% or more of the South Korean general public who believe quite firmly that he did overreach. I think the court that has made this decision is doing something that is probably quite sensible, which is following legal procedure, both the spirit and very clearly the letter of the law. And that's designed to send a very clear message that the courts will act in a way that is consistent with their professional duties and obligations. And that's as it should be, because obviously any decision on the question of impeachment before the Constitutional Court, and then the wider issue of the alleged criminality of the president's behavior needs to be seen to be carried out in a fair and transparent and consistent manner. So I think we should welcome this as an appropriate application of the law, but there will no doubt there will be efforts by partisans on both sides, both on the right and the left of the political system, to try and exploit this issue for their own benefits.
He's out now, but there is a likelihood that if he is convicted on charges of insurrection, this could land him back in jail for a very long time.
I would question this idea that he's actually physically out at this stage, given that the prosecution has that freedom to make that decision to appeal. The big issue here is, and this is actually a substantive question, is the question of whether, in fact, by being released from custody, he might be free, therefore, to tamper with evidence. This has been a big concern that the Corruption Investigation Office and prosecutors in general have been making consistently. A separate decision has just been reached to allow the arrest of 2 members of the president's personal security service, who themselves have been accused of having tampered with evidence under the instructions of President Yoon. Critical evidence that related to information and phone calls that may have taken place between President Yoon and senior military commanders during the period of martial law back on December the 3rd. And this is therefore very important. How can the integrity of any future criminal trial be preserved if there is a risk that evidence that is germane to that investigation might be tampered with?
John Nilsson Wright, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. The time here in London is 12:07 p.m. Let's get a summary of the day's other news stories now. Here's Monica Lillis.
Thanks, Emma. Ukraine has used French Mirage fighter jets to help stop a major Russian air attack for the first time. Russia launched waves of missiles and drones overnight. Ukraine says its air defences shot down many of them. Malaysia may ban older tourists from climbing Mount Kinabalu after several recent deaths. A British man in his 70s collapsed near the summit last week. Officials are considering an age limit or fitness test. King Charles has shared his personal playlist in a new show for Apple Music. Released for Commonwealth Day, it features reggae, disco and Afrobeats with artists like Bob Marley, Grace Jones and Kylie Minogue. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Monica. Now, passengers trying to take the Eurostar between London and Paris this morning have been told to rebook their journeys for another day. A Second World War bomb has been discovered near to the Gare du Nord. The bomb was found in the middle of the tracks in the area of Saint-Denis during works that were taking place overnight. Well, Simon Bouvier is Monocle's bureau chief in Paris. He's been monitoring the situation. He joins us from our studio there now. Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon, Emma.
So this was unexpected. I mean, what is the picture like out there where you are?
Well, I think everybody's phones in Paris blew up, maybe a bad pun, this morning with news that at 3:30 a.m. last night, this 500-kilogram bomb, including 200 kilos of unexploded charge, was discovered during works on the railway line in Saint-Denis, as you said. And so it's been hugely disruptive. 1 kilometer radius around the bomb has been cleared. Some dwellings with windows facing this unexploded bomb have been evacuated as a matter of precaution. And of course, all of the train traffic out of Gare du Nord is now suspended while the defusal of this bomb is being organized.
I mean, it's one of those stations, isn't it, that it is incredibly central to the way that Paris is connected to not just to other countries, most notably the United Kingdom, but also if you're travelling north, you get the train to Charles de Gaulle Airport from out of there.
Absolutely. Gare du Nord is one of the busiest train stations in Europe. The SNCF, the French railway operator, numbers say that they had about 226 million travelers coming through there in 2023. So the disruption is not limited to these lines between Paris and London, which we at Monocle use often, but also to light rail, metro traffic. Even the motorways, the ring road, the peripheric ring road, and the A1 motorway that are around the site where this bomb was discovered are partly closed. So yes, it's not surprising that it has caused us some massive disruptions. Our colleagues over at Le Parisien are reporting massive lines in the Opéra area where the Roissy bus, which takes travelers to Charles de Gaulle Airport, which you mentioned, by road rather than by rail, stops. So, they're stepping up the availability of these vehicles. They're putting more trains on alternative metro lines. So, the authorities were prepared for a scenario like this, and they're slowly deploying it. But a train station this size that grinds to a halt is always going to cause massive disruption.
The discovery of a World War II bomb is something which sadly happens quite a lot. What is the sort of the protocol for here? I mean, it sounds as if everybody's trying to get things up and running and sort of like literally divert around it. But how often does this thing happen?
Well, there are a few precedents in the Paris area. 10 years ago, three English bombs, actually dating back from World War II as well, were discovered in Noisy-le-Sec in the same area in the outskirts of Paris. Also similar circumstances during a SNCF kind of construction project. What's interesting, our colleagues over at Le Monde report that the area where this particular bomb was discovered last night was known to be a site where World War II vestiges were likely to be discovered. So it wasn't exactly a huge surprise for the construction team that they were going to happen on something. In this case, it just was a half-a-ton bomb. And there was a pyrotechnician actually working on shift. So they were prepared for this.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't sort of conjure questions about how a half-ton bomb can be found in the middle of rail tracks in the French capital. I mean, one wonders how long that thing's, well, we know how long it's been there, but how many trains have run over it and it has not set anything off?
Yes, I think everybody is wondering the same things. I think as the specifics emerge of where exactly this bomb was discovered, we know the approximate location on the Boulevard Président Wilson, number 116 or thereabouts, apparently in Saint-Denis. But it's in the near vicinity of the tracks. We don't know if trains had been like rolling over it or anything like that. But yes, this kind of thing does happen, and they were staffed to deal with it.
But it's not really fair. The staff are equipped to deal with this. So this is a different kind of sabotage. The rail networks have been sabotaged by history, but unfortunately, we do get quite a lot of stories coming out of France where, I'm just thinking of the Olympics, just before the 2024 games started, people managed to completely blockade or mess the lines. It sounds as if the French authorities have sort of quite a complicated life on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also goes with the territory of having one of the best developed, and for all of our collective complaints, speaking for my fellow countrymen and I here, it's one of the most developed and most far-reaching rail networks in Europe. And so, when you have a network that is that big, there are bound to be disruptions. But yes, you mentioned that incident during the Olympics. It was kind of the one security hiccup of the entire operation. These saboteurs who had heavily disrupted traffic by sabotaging the train lines, but also through social unrest, strikes, and so on. The authorities have kind of grown used to making alternative plans when a specific line or a specific area of the city or a specific part of the network is not usable. So maybe it comes with the territory of dealing with all of the social unrest to be particularly agile under these circumstances. Although in this case, you can never know when you're going to fall upon a half a ton's worth of bomb.
Indeed, it can happen to the best of us. Simon Bouvier, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Paris. We'll be back in Paris in a little while to hear from our design editor, Nic Monisse, who'll be talking about the latest design fair he's been at. So stay tuned to the briefing on Monocle Radio. 12:15 here in London. It is becoming all too easy to draw comparisons between the way Donald Trump has been conducting international trade relations and the way in which a car may be driven at speed, dangerously, and with little idea of its destination. The expressions heading for a car crash and violent handbrake turns are springing rapidly to mind. But for America's automotive industry, the effects are very real, having warned that imposing 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, the US car makers have warned of steep price hikes in their goods. Share prices have tumbled. And with Mr. Trump now putting the brakes on the tariffs, what is the industry to do? Well, joining me now is Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, a regular voice here on Monocle Radio. Welcome back, Natasha.
Thanks for having me.
So this must have been one of the most unpredictable weeks in history for America's automotive industry.
Oh, definitely. And I know they've been applying a lot of pressure because they're going to be really hard hit by any kind of tariffs because automakers, they've spent decades expanding around the world and they have different parts that are all over the place. And so they're going to be hit differently based on exactly where their supply chain is. I know that GM and Ford, they've shrunk back and their global footprint isn't quite as big as it had once been. But if you think about a car that has hundreds of components and some components are here or there, so you could have a disaster halfway across the world and that could impact one tiny component. And then that will affect the production for a vehicle for weeks. So all this uncertainty regarding Trump's tariffs and now he's granted them a 1 month pause, it's going to make it incredibly difficult for the car industry. You just can't move factories overnight. You can't build a factory overnight, and product lines can't be changed overnight.
I mean, we had we had about 48 hours worth of tariffs, didn't we, from midnight to Tuesday till when Mr. Trump announced that the tariffs were going to be suspended. I mean, if you were a car maker whose production and whose, as you know, all the things that you have just described were dependent on being able to move things between Mexico and Canada and then back again at top speed, what effect would those 48 hours have had on you and your ability to operate?
So it might not have had a huge effect yet because they do have inventory and they had been doing that since COVID to make sure that they have a strategic amount of parts on hand, enough to account for like a short disruption. And so, not so much that too much capital is tied up, but they do have some of that on hand, so it shouldn't have caused a huge disruption. But I think the bigger problem is that they've been hurt by stock prices of, all the stock prices of the automakers have been taking a hit due to all the uncertainty that's been going on. And it just makes it very difficult for them to plan about what they're going to do. And also there's already the tariffs on steel and aluminum that's going into effect. And so there's it's very, very difficult time for the automotive industry to manage what Trump is going to do because they have to engage in long-term plans, and he's not letting them really do that.
That said, if you think about it, what Donald Trump has just done is quite clever because it has forced the American automotive industry to look closer to home and to actually plan to reshore a lot of its work. Is this actually going to be one of those moments where, as a preemptive measure, America decides to make things as much at home as it possibly can to avoid any further threat or consequence of a tariff that might come down the track?
Well, they'll definitely be trying to do that to some extent. As I mentioned, GM and Ford had been trying to not have so many of they're still really global companies. And it's not something that they can just change immediately. It takes time. So he's really actually hurting these industries very dramatically by saying, okay, you need to have everything at home, when the economies of Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. have become very complementary. And this is something that is built up over decades. And you have also the issue that labor costs are much different in Mexico than they are in the U.S. So that's going to increase the cost of the finished product, which, of course, then is put on the consumer.
Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex, thank you for joining us on The Briefing. After 400 years, Denmark's postal services is to stop delivering post. The announcement was made after the number of letters being sent in the country dropped by 95%. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Michael Booth, Monocle's Copenhagen correspondent. Good afternoon, Michael. Good to have you.
Hi, hello.
Thank you
to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mentioned that the Postal Service is to stop delivering post, but it's not everything, is it? It's just certain aspects, including letters.
It's letters, yeah, exactly. And as you said, the PostNord, which is the name of the state-owned postal service in Denmark, and it's 60% Swedish-owned, 60% Danish-owned. It's had an appalling reputation for the last 10 years at least. It's rather like Scandinavian airlines, these Scandinavian state-owned behemoths. They just don't function very well. And as you say, people just aren't sending letters anymore, down more than 90% since 2000. And then yesterday it was announced they're stopping at the end of this year. That's it for the post service to be picking up and sending letters. They're going to get rid of the post boxes. There's not going to be any more postmen. But there are, of course, private companies that are actually already cheaper at sending letters than the state-run service. So it's not completely over, but there's no more stamps. It's quite a change to like the physical infrastructure of Denmark. You know, the red post boxes are a landmark everywhere.
Explain to us, you said that it has been a bad time for the postal service itself. I mean, what's it done wrong?
I think I'm not across the details, but it's lost an awful lot of money. It lost £45 million last year. And I just think, without pointing the finger at the state running large organisations, there's maybe a lack of ruthlessness. But of course, people aren't sending letters, so the shift to digital, which has happened in Denmark faster than almost any other nation in the world, has, of course, massively impacted the fact that people just aren't sending letters. Plus, sending letters, it ends up being really, really expensive in Denmark. The national service, PostNord, was charging something like £4 to send a letter, and it's just not justifiable when so much of the world functions in the digital realm today. But there are still about 270,000 households in Denmark that are not registered as digital receivers for example, state communications from the tax office or whatever. So there seems to there's a gap there in the market. And the strange thing is the company that's stepping in is owned by one of the big newspaper groups in Denmark, Jyllands-Posten and Politiken, who previously, that was the company that delivered newspapers, right? So they already have these people going out to people's houses. So they're saying, yeah, we've got room in our post bags to stick your letters in there, and they're already cheaper to deliver letters. So it's not a great loss, but there's a cultural shift happening there, which I think a lot of Danes are quite unhappy about, actually.
Michael, let me play a quick interview with Mindaugas Sapikis. He's director of the Postal and Delivery Service at Copenhagen Economics. And a little while ago, he talked to me about the fact that there's an international element to this, isn't there? Because letters don't just get sent internally.
When talking with our contacts globally, we hear the same story. This development is absolutely unprecedented globally. It will be a first experiment to the international postal system. So it's not only about Denmark. And no other national operator has seized letter delivery yet. Post Denmark, just a reminder, it has provided this service for 400 years. And Denmark as a country must still deliver international letters under the UPU Convention, that's under United Nations. And so the key question now to our contacts and network in the industry is who will take over this task, and importantly, at what service level. And so far, we have seen that 2 companies have shown interest in taking over letter delivery in Denmark, but that remains to be seen.
Michael, just listening to that, the fact remains is that letters still will need to be sent. Does that provide some sort of reassuring element to the Danes who might not be ready to give up the attachment to a national postal service?
I don't think it's reassuring at all, really, unfortunately. And I think for the outside world, the Danes are the canary down the coal mine, because also yesterday, the German postal service announced they were going to be laying off 8,000 of their postal workers. As I said, the Danish postal service is co-owned with Sweden. They haven't yet announced they'll be stopping the letters, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. And the same company also covers Finland and Norway. So as with digitalization, the Scandinavian countries look like they're ahead of the curve on getting rid of letters. I think it's inevitable. I can't see there's a way back from this, unfortunately. And in reality, what it means is people are going to have to go along to these awful shops that also where you go to pick up your packages. It might be a hairdresser, or it might be my nearest one is a moped repair shop. I have to go in to deliver and pick up packages, and everything will have to be ordered online, and you get a digital stamp, a number which you'll write on the envelope, and you'll potter down to your local hairdresser or whoever has these packages piled up in the corner of their shop. It's just a bit ramshackle and rubbish, unfortunately. And you lose that, as the gentleman said there, that 400 years of romance of the horse and carriage delivering the letters and the mail train and all of that kind of stuff. It's a dying world, and I fear it's going to be spreading to the rest of the world.
Michael Booth, Monocle's Copenhagen correspondent, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Briefing. Finally, let's return to our Paris bureau. We can hear now from Nic Monisse, Monocle's design editor. He's been at the Matter and Shape design salon this morning. A very good afternoon to you, Nic.
Very good afternoon to you, Emma Nelson. No, I have pushed Simon out of the studio and I've taken it over myself. And it's lovely in here, I must say.
That's quite a feat, given the fact that I don't think Simon will mind us saying that he is extraordinarily tall. So it would have been quite a big shove.
And I am surprisingly strong, Emma Nelson. I just want that on record. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, and we also don't want to tell everybody that there's clearly borderline fisticuffs going on in a brand new office. It's possibly not the image that we want to convey.
No, professional from here on out.
Come on then, let's focus, although images are swirling through my head now. Right, let's go to Matter and Shape. It's a new show. It's a newish show, at least. Tell us what it's about.
Yeah, 100%. This is its second iteration, and it's basically doubled in size. So, and I like the fact that you've used the full title, explained it as a salon, and I think that's very, very key. So it is. Look, it's in gardens in the centre of Paris in these amazing tents where you've got about 60 different exhibitors, design brands, designers, independent designers showcasing their works. That might sound like a trade fair, but speaking to Dan Thorley, who's the bloke that set it up, he's an Australian curator, based in Paris. He is very keen to emphasise that this is a salon. This is about conversation. This is about bringing people together to have a talk. Yes, there's new work on show, but it's really about it's really about bringing people together for a moment to converse, to maybe build some creative partnerships, maybe find a new designer that you might want to work with if you're not a designer and you're just kind of wandering through. So that's kind of the key. It feels much less of a trade fair and much more of and I don't want to make it sound like my job's not hard, but much more of a jolly.
Excellent. And it does tie into the idea of a Frenchness to it. I mean, the fact that they want to call it a salon takes us right back to the 18th century in the Académie des Beaux-Arts and the idea that the French can do a talking shop like no one else. So what is it about this event which makes it feel quintessentially French?
Can I say all the French people here? No, that's the starting
point.
Starting point. No, I think it's the fact that, I mean, for me, I was talking about this very thing this morning with David Jouard, who runs an amazing gallery here in Paris, and we were chatting over coffee with him and our associate editor, Grace Charlton, and we were talking about the fact that it feels like Paris has really cemented itself as maybe less design industry capital, but more designer capital, if that makes sense. And it probably doesn't, so I'll elaborate on what I'm talking about. I think Milan is still very much the place you go where you want to mass manufacture furniture. They're the brands that are really specialising in doing that, or the kind of the Italian brands based in Lombardy. But I think if you're talking about places where there's a sense of adventure, where there's some real creativity, where there's new young names emerging, Paris seems to be the place for that to take place. And there's a host of what David and I were talking about this morning. Is there's a host of events throughout the year. They start with Maison Objet in January. We've got Matter and Shape right now. Then there's Pad Paris coming up, which is a collectible design fair. You've then got Paris Design Week in September, and then you've got Design Miami, Paris, all taking place. So you've kind of got these 5 or 6 landmark moments throughout the year where this happens. And because it tends to be smaller scale brands, there is this, you end up having this conversation because it's all personal relationships. You don't have the PR or the marketing people kind of functioning as middlemen. I had a chat with India Madhavi this morning, an amazing Paris-based designer, a big name in design, and she's just kind of floating around the fair. And you kind of don't get that at something like Salone del Mobile, which is an amazing trade fair, but doing something very, very different in Milan.
So in your continued continued relentless horizon scanning that you do, what are you most looking forward to from this event?
I think the one thing I will say, oh gosh, Emma, I've done it again. I'm going to sound like I'm just shopping on work time. They have So there's very expensive furniture on show, some amazing chairs, bespoke cabinetry, gorgeous new mirrors by a new brand called Noga. But at the end of the trade fair, they have a little area where you can shop. You can buy some books, you can buy some candles, you can buy some lovely glassware. It's the sort of thing that you can maybe put into your carry-on and bring home with you on the Eurostar tomorrow. Not that I'm doing that on work time.
And not that the Eurostar's working anyway, but thank you. The best of luck this afternoon. Nic Monisse.
I'm coming tomorrow. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me, Emma Nelson. Simone and I are going to have some fun this afternoon, a bit of a wrestle.
Excellent. Nic Monisse in Paris, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, because that's all the time we have for today's programme. Hassan Anderson was our producer, our researcher was Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. We'll be back with a briefing on Monday, but for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.